welcome back. We are going to continue on with our How to Write an Essay series. But in this particular video, I'm actually going to be talking about not plagiarizing. So this is relevant whether you are writing an essay or whether you're addressing an inquiry question with an investigation or something like that. This will be relevant to you because essentially I'm going to be going through how to make effective notes to then make sure that nothing is copied and pasted and that your ideas are referenced correctly. So just a couple of points to start with. We leave the introduction and the conclusion until last. Why do we do that? Because if we haven't finished all of the main body, we actually don't know what we're introducing or what we're concluding. So we leave that until last. Just a hot tip in your research, you may want to use Control F or Command F if you're an Apple person as you are researching online to find keywords. So if you open up a web page and then you go Control F and you look up circumnavigation, or if you look up round for the earth is round, and that's not in your website anywhere, you know that that's not going to be a useful source to you. Or you might be looking at a really long page and just want to find the part where it talks about circumnavigation. And so you can really effectively do that by using that tool. Cool. As you can see, I have already gone ahead and made some notes. This is because it actually took me a very long time because I have to read. And so for me to make a video of me doing this and reading is not very fun. So I essentially, for about 40 minutes or so, 40 minutes, I did some research and read a whole bunch of sources. Some of them I will use and some of them I will not. So the first one we can see is this one. Now you'll notice that I actually have pasted the two links down here. The first one is the one that I actually used to find this information, and the second one we can see here, cross-reference for additional dates, etc. This is just a useful thing that I found that will back up this other source. You can see both of them. We've got National Geographic and Britannica. Both of these are reliable sources because they are both very reputable organizations, and Britannica is like an online encyclopedia. So we can see here we've got Magellan was the first to sail around the world, right? Think again. It's just an article talking about the first circumnavigation and it provides a little bit of extra detail. I've chosen this because it is a reliable source. I've also chosen it because it gives me information about who I'm talking about. Okay, so if we think who, what, when, where, why, this addresses who. Now, here's the great part. I read this whole article. Yes, middle school students, I read this whole thing with my brain and my eyes. That is the only way that you are going to get information from anywhere, is if you actually read it. You can also find YouTube videos. They will give you information through your ears, but generally you are going to need to read something at some point. That means you need to be in a quiet environment, and it means that you need to use your brain. What I found from this, we can see here in these dot points. Now, you'll notice that I didn't copy and paste anything. If I had, I would have put it into a different color so that I could remember that I had copied and pasted it. What I have done is I've taken down some really key points and really key words. The first one is the guy's name. The second thing that I found here is actually a really fun fact. Okay, so he actually took a slave with him. The slave was born originally in the Philippines, and this guy sailed from somewhere in Europe, and he had this slave with him. He sailed all around here, and when he got to the Philippines, this guy, this slave that he had brought with him, actually could speak the native language because he was home. And so the point of this article is actually that Magellan is not the first person to circumnavigate the globe. It actually was his slave, Enrique, which is amazing. And so that's a really fun fact that I found. Now, notice that I haven't taken that on a tangent. I still need to answer this question. So my whole essay is not going to be redirected by this fun thing that I found. I did learn something that doesn't directly associate with my assessment piece, and that's okay. It's okay to learn something fun that's not directly associated with the essay question. We can see here, he took a slave with him who was born in the Philippines. Technically, Enrique was the first to circumnavigate. I told you about that more than what is the dot point there because I have it in my head, because I understood it. So in this section of the video, I actually just want to dive a little bit deeper into how we get these notes. So you'll see I've added this read, understand, write, check. Remember, look cover right check from primary school, but it's different this time. So we need to read the information and understand it. That's what I talked about before. So if we're talking about, we'll get back to that bit later. If we're talking about this bit here, this is the paragraph that I found the fun fact. So you can pause the video, read this paragraph, but essentially from this, I did not talk about how Enrique, the Filipino slave, could speak the people's language. I didn't talk about how he was likely raised there. All I did in my notes was say that the main Portuguese guy took the slave with him, and technically this slave was the first to circumnavigate. And so from these notes, I've remembered a couple of those random details, but it's very unlikely that from those notes I'm actually going to be repeating some of the core pieces from here that are the ideas that I would be taking from someone else. I just have the bare facts of the information, because essentially, remember, this is point 1. We only want 150 to 200 words from this. If I put in all the detail from every source that I look at, just because I'm trying to scrape together detail, that's not going to make for a good essay that answers the question. So the next part that I looked at, I thought maybe this won't be enough to kind of really fill out that first point. Let's talk about other circumnavigation. So I found that someone has circumnavigated the globe on a bike. So what I did was I went to Wikipedia, and again, I'm not going to actually reference this because I'm not taking information from it, but I'm using it as a springboard to find other information. I found out that Thomas Stevens was the first person to circle the globe on a bicycle. Which is just great. So then what I did was I Googled Thomas Stevens bike, and I came up with a couple of websites. Now, unfortunately, none of the websites on this page are reliable, I would say, but we do have a couple of similar ones. So there's the first two are websites that sell bikes or websites that like bikes. And so what I can actually do is compare the two stories. And that will help me be able to trust the resource, because I'm actually learning the same thing from two different places. Essentially, I did not read this whole thing. I skim read it because I wanted some very specific information. I wanted to know where he started and then that he actually finished circumnavigating the globe, and I wanted to know when it was. And so as we go through this, there's a lot of information that I read through and I found interesting, but essentially what I ended up with in my notes was it happened in the 1800s, and then later down here I've got the specific years. I've got the person, I've got how he traveled, so on his penny farthing, so one of those really big bikes with the big front wheel. He started in America, he went through Asia, he ended in America, and he traveled by boat over the seas or the oceans. And so that's my next point within point 1. That's all the information that I took from this source, because that's all that was really relevant. We need to be careful that we don't overcompensate or overtake notes, because that can be where we start copying little phrases and that just to get up our word count. If we really understand the information, we don't need to worry about that. So I've read and understood the information, and then I've made the notes, and then what I need to do is actually go back and check that I've got them right. Okay, so I actually copied these date down and then went back and checked a couple times. So we need to make sure that we're doing that. Read, understand, write the notes, and then check that we didn't miss anything or that we didn't get anything accidentally wrong, like a date or a name. And then my conclusion for point 1 is circumnavigation would not be possible if the world was not round. You'll also notice that I have shifted the data point. So I did, in my previous video, I talked about how there was going to be data in the first section. I actually spent quite a long time, maybe 20 minutes or so, finding other websites that talked about data around one of these options. And I found that this actually had the most relevance to the data that I wanted to include in order to tick this box in the rubric. And so I did find this data around satellites, which relates to the GPS, and I've put my URL down there. Made the URL a bit smaller just to make sure that it's not ugly and so that it's easy to read. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about how to turn these notes into actual sentences. But at this point, this is all we should have. We should just have a bunch of notes and a bunch of URLs to copy from. Cool, thanks.